Hello. Thank you for coming on a rainy day. I know it wasn't an easy walk, but today we're going to be talking about game theory and attacks, and it's just going to be me and Jake lecturing today. So here are just some announcements on assignments so far. Yesterday, your discussion 1 was due. It was current events in blockchain, and we got 115 out of 150 responses, which is pretty great. Next week, we're going to release our discussion 2 on consensus protocols. So just be on the lookout for that. That's going to be due 2 weeks from next week. And then quiz 5, as always, is going to be released after lecture today and due next Monday, March 6th at 11:59 p.m. So in previous weeks, we've talked about kind of the intro to blockchain, the history of Bitcoin, and the more technical aspects about Bitcoin. And today we're going to be talking about the attacks and the vulnerabilities of blockchain and specifically Bitcoin. So let's talk a little bit about mining pools. I know we discussed this in lecture 3, but go ahead and refresh your memory, turn to the person next to you and just discuss what you remember about mining pools and perhaps the 2 reward schemes of mining pools. Go ahead, I'll give you 1 minute to do that.
It'd be like, oh, like to get you guys started, like turn to your neighbor and tell them what you ate last. And then like people start talking. Trust me, it'll work.
Okay, Jake wants me to say, instead of doing that, turn to your neighbor and ask each other what you ate for lunch and then talk about mining pools. Go ahead. Start. That flopped. I'm so sorry.
Got hella work. Okay, everyone's talking. See that hella work. I'm hitting for that. I'm hitting. It's such a good play.
Yeah. What happened? Okay, I see that conversations are dying out. So does somebody want to raise their hand and tell me what you remember about mining pools from lecture 3? No? Okay. Yes, I saw that.
Like a group of people that try to mining the Bitcoin together and carrying to the network.
Exactly, that's exactly correct. So what are mining pools? Mining pools allow individual miners to combine, like you said, or pull together their computational power in order to increase their rewards. So this is because it reduces variance in mining rewards. So they are usually run by pool managers or pool operators, and the pool manager usually takes a cut of the mining rewards. And if you remember from lecture 3, we discussed 2 mining reward schemes. So we're going to talk about mining shares first. So how this works is essentially miners in a pool can submit shares, which are not valid blocks, but they're valid shares. So if you see on the right side, this is a hash of a valid block where you kind of show a specific number of zeros preceding the value. And so this just shows proof of work. But then a valid share is just basically the exact same thing, but with less zeros. So it's just a lot easier to produce a valid share than a valid block. And yeah, basically just solving proof of work with a lower difficulty. And the pool operator would pay out for valid shares, and valid blocks are considered shares as well. So this means that the individual who actually finds the valid block still gets paid the exact same as everybody else who submitted shares, regardless of like the fact that they were the one who found the actual valid block. So these are the 2 reward schemes. The first one we're going to be talking about is pay per share. So this is where the pool pays out at every single share submitted. So if I'm a miner and I submit one of the shares, I get paid immediately rather than after like a valid block is found. So all shares are worth the same amount, and it's more beneficial to miners because individual miners have no risk from reward variance, and the pool takes on the risk completely. So they have to pay no matter if they find the valid block in this specific block on the blockchain or not. And the problem with this is that there's no incentive for individuals to actually submit valid blocks. So they might just be like, oh, if I find this valid share already and I'm already going to get paid, then I'm just going to submit this valid share and not wait until, I actually find the valid block, because if I submit a share, I still get paid anyways. Yeah. But this is not the case in the proportional reward scheme, because the pool only pays out when the blocks are found. So miners are paid proportional to the number of shares they've submitted since the last block. So this means that, for example, if I submit a share, and if Jake submits a share, and we're the only two people who submit the share before the next block is found, then just the two of us, we're going to share that 6.25 Bitcoin. And so we're going to get a lot of Bitcoins. But if it's me, I submit a share, Jake submits a share, and 100 other people submit a share, there's 102 of us who have submitted a share. So each of us are only going to get 1 out of 102 of that 6.25 Bitcoin. And this is going to be more beneficial to the pool because individual miners still bear some risk in the variance proportional to the size of the pool. What this means is that the pool, because they don't have to pay out until a valid block is found, then they're not bearing the risk of like having to pay more even when the block is not found and they don't get the reward. This is not going to be a problem if the pool is sufficiently large, and this is lower risk for pool operators because they only pay out when the reward is found. So these next slides are going to be a lot of math. So if you love math, these slides are for you. But if not, then it's totally okay. This is just kind of showing how we got here and why, joining a mining pool is going to be better for you than solo mining. So here is how expected reward works. So the current block reward right now is 6.25 Bitcoin. And if you have an Antminer S19 Pro, that hashes at 110 terahashes per second. Up here is the conversion chart. So if you can see, 1 hash, so 1 terahash is 1 trillion of a hash, and then 1 exahash is 1 quintillion of a hash, which is 1 million times a terahash. So that's just something you might have to know for the calculations down below. But so today, or this was last week because I made this slide last week, but on February 22nd, 2023, the network hash rate was 343 million terahashes, like around there. And so this is essentially the working power of all the miners added together. So this is essentially the total power of the entire network of Bitcoin. So the higher the hash rate, the more secure the network, because you would need higher power in order to carry out a 51% attack. So down here, we do the proportion of network hash rate. So if I have, again, an Antminer S19 Pro, I have 110 terahashes per second, and this total network hash rate of 343,910,000 terahashes per second, my hash power divided by the total network hash power is this number, which is very, very small. And that's your probability of finding the next block. So with solo mining, the expected value, my expected rewards of Bitcoin per year is going to be that number. And how we break that down is 52,560 is the number of blocks per year. And we get that by calculating you get 1 block every 10 minutes. So you kind of just multiply that. You do 10 times 365 days times 6. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to do the math, but essentially, if you mine 1 block every 10 minutes, then you would get 52,560 blocks per year. And so that number, the very first one, the one with a bunch of zeros and then 319, that's again from the last slide, the proportion of your network hash rate. And then if you multiply that by the Bitcoin reward of mining 1 valid block, 6.25, then you would get around 0.105 Bitcoin per year. And then the standard deviation of that, using the standard deviation formula, you would get 0.81 Bitcoin per year, which is a very high variance, which means that it is very risky for you to be doing solo mining. And it's important to note that the hash rate does change pretty often. So from last semester, these slides, it used to say 286 exahashes per second, but now it's 343.91 exahashes per second. Again, with the conversion, that is, that's 1 million times a terahash. But with pool mining, on the other hand, so let's just assume that the pool has 1/6 of the total network hash rate. So the calculation we did here, 343 divided by 6, is just kind of the expected amount of the hash rate that the pool that you joined has. And this is just 1/6 of the network is just a hypothetical number that your pool has 1/6 of the total hash power. So then the proportion of the pool hash rate would again be, so you have an Antminer, which is 110 terahashes per second. And then in your pool, they have around 57.318 exahashes per second. Then your proportion of the pool hash rate is going to be this number, which is 0.0000001919, whatever. So then your expected value would be that number multiplied by the number of blocks mined per year, divided by 6, multiplied by the Bitcoin reward, 6.25, and you would still get the exact same number as the slide before, which is 0.105 Bitcoin per year. But the difference here is that the standard deviation is much, much lower. So as you can see here, the standard deviation is 0.00102 compared to this one, 0.81. So this just means that if you join a mining pool, your variance is going to be a lot lower, so the risk isn't as high. And so expected to mine 1 in every 6 blocks, which is every hour. So the calculation we did here is just if you mine 1 block every 10 minutes, then it's 1 in every 6 blocks if you join this mining pool. And this is a much more consistent revenue stream. So all of these black slides we just saw, they're just calculations to show that it's much better and much less risky for you to join a mining pool versus solo mining. So here are some pros and cons of mining pools. So the first one is that it allows individual miners to participate, because somebody might be like, oh, I only have 1 Antminer. My proportion for the whole network hash rate is so low that I'm probably not even going to get any Bitcoin. So what's the point of participating in it? But if you are able to join a mining pool and pool together your resources with other people, then it's possible for you to still earn some profit rather than not joining one at all. And then the cons. So one of the cons is that the pool manager has to be trusted. So what this means is that when you join a mining pool, again, you kind of are trusting that the pool manager is acting honestly. So it makes the whole system a little bit centralized, but there are still practices in place that try to make sure that it's as decentralized as possible. But this is a con of mining pools. The second one is that this mining pool situation enables a multitude of attacks, which we're about to get into. So you might wonder, is there some incentive misalignment? So these are 2 questions that you might be asking yourself right now. First, can miners take advantage of the differences in these 2 types of payout schemes? And number 2, is it possible that mining pools are vulnerable to some incentive misalignment? So let's turn to your neighbors again and let's discuss what you think about these 2 questions. I'll give you 1 minute to do that. Okay, let's talk about what you're about to eat for dinner and then talk about these 2 questions. Go. I need water.
We didn't always work.
I already did. Huh?
Yeah.
What happened? Okay, let's come back together. Let's let our conversations die out. Okay, so does somebody want to tell me what they answered for both of these questions? It could just be a simple yes or no, because we'll be going over it anyway. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's yes. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's no. Raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand yet. Okay, so does that mean you don't know? Okay. Okay, so the answer is yes. A lot of you answered this, and now we're going to be going over what ways miners can take advantage of the differences, as well as if it's possible for mining pools to become vulnerable due to incentive misalignment. So for the first question, it is possible to pool hop. So if I'm a miner and I see that one mining pool is profitable right now, but then another one becomes more profitable later on, I could start off in this one and then hop to the other one later. So rewards in a pay per share, rewards per share in a proportional pool are inversely related to the number of shares submitted while mining the current block. And so this is what I mentioned earlier about how if me and Jake were the only two people who submitted shares, then we would both be getting half of the rewards. But if there was 100 other people, then we would only be getting 1 out of 102 of those rewards. So this is why it's inversely related, because your rewards per share are going to go down if more people are submitting shares since the last block. On the other hand, for rewards per share in a pay per share pool, in this blue line, they're going to stay constant no matter how many shares are submitted. So this intersection right here, after this amount of shares are submitted, is when it becomes less profitable to be in a proportional model than it is to be in a pay per share model. So once you get past here, you might want to hop from a proportional pool to a pay per share pool. So yeah, that's how a miner would maximize their expected profit, is by hopping pools. Okay, so that responded to the first question, if they can take advantage of the different types of pools. And as for the second question, we're going to talk about pool cannibalization. So I think this name is a little bit misleading because I don't really know why it's called pool cannibalization. But essentially, pool cannibalization is when you distribute some small percentage of mining power equally among all the other pools while withholding valid blocks. And the rewards from those other pools are still going to be received, and it's undetectable unless statistically significant. Okay, so that probably made zero sense. So let's break it down. So let's say this half of the room is in my pool, and this half of the room is in Jake's pool. Okay, I'm going to tell all my miners on this pool that, hey, all of you are going to pretend you're joining Jake's pool, and you're actually going to go join Jake's pool, and you're going to submit all your valid shares to Jake's pool, but you're only going to submit the valid blocks to my pool. So you're going to be submitting shares here, and Jake's going to think you're all honest miners, and you're still going to be getting all the rewards that Jake's pool is getting. But then when you actually find a block, you're only going to submit that to me. So let's also break that down. So this is just a hypothetical situation. This wouldn't be what it's actually like in the real world, but this is if we don't pool cannibalize, okay? So if we have 30 hashes per second, and we, as in my pool, this half of the room, and the total network of all the pools, this whole entire room, is 100 hashes per second, and let's just assume the reward is 1 Bitcoin. And so our pool right here has 30% of the hash rate, and so our expected value is going to be 0.3 times 1 Bitcoin per block. And so let's say another miner joins and they are worth 1 hash per second. What happens in a standard mining strategy where we're not pool cannibalizing is that when we add that 1 hash to our own pool, we get 31 out of 101 of the total network hash rate, right? Because my pool, we increase by 1 hash, and then the total network also increases by 1 hash per second. So that's 30.69%. And our reward would be that number times 1 Bitcoin, which is 0.3069 Bitcoin per block. And so the marginal revenue of adding that 1 hash to our pool is going to be this number, 0.0069 Bitcoin per block, for adding just this 1 hash per second. But if we pool cannibalize, so we distribute this 1 hash per second among all other pools. And in the real world, there's going to be more than just me and Jake's pool. But for now, let's just assume that I have a pool and Jake has a pool, and Jake's pool is the entire rest of the network. So everybody on my side is gonna withhold their valid blocks and submit that only to my pool, right? So the pool, Jake's pool, thinks that it's running at 71 hashes per second because that one new miner went to his pool even though they came to mine first. And so I'm gonna be getting 1 out of 71 of that reward in Jake's pool. And so Jake only has 70 effective hashes per second because the final 1 hash per second will never result in a valid block being submitted to his pool. So then the expected value for me is going to be 1 out of 71 times 70 out of 101 from his pool times 1 Bitcoin. So this is 0.0098 Bitcoin per block for that additional 1 hash per second. And so this is a 42% larger expected revenue gain from pool cannibalization compared to this number, which was 0.0069 Bitcoin per block. All right. So that was also very mathy. That is also not something you really much need to know, but it's just good to break it down so you can see how pool cannibalization could potentially be more profitable for a miner than if you're just solo, or if you're mining in a pool, honestly, without cannibalizing. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about pool wars. So let's just assume, again, we have 2 pools, me and Jake. So attack decisions resemble an iterative game. So pool 1 is deciding if it attacks pool 2, and then pool 2 is deciding if it attacks pool 1, and it just keeps going over and over and over again. And each iteration of the game is a case of the prisoner's dilemma. So now let's talk about the prisoner's dilemma. Does anybody want to tell me what they know about it? Anything they've learned in previous classes, or just what they know about the prisoner's dilemma? Or I'm going to make you turn to your partner again. Okay. Let's talk about what your favorite Disney character is, and then talk about what the prisoner's dilemma is. Go. What happened? Yeah. No, probably not. Where is it? 85? Is that next door? Wait, what's 8IO's next? Really?
It's basically
Okay, try it.
but it's
I feel like you never can.
good.
Fuck off. Okay. Okay, let's come back together. Does anybody want to explain what the prisoner's dilemma is? Okay, so we don't have to get into it, but essentially a prisoner's dilemma is, okay, if Jake and I were prisoners and the 2 of us committed a crime, then the investigators are like giving both of us, they're putting us in separate rooms, and then they're telling both of us the exact same thing. They're saying, oh, if you rat the other person out, that person gets life in prison and you go free. But if you both, rat each other out, then you both get 7 years in prison. But if both of you say, confess to doing it, then both of you get 3 years in prison, so a lesser sentence. So the prisoner's dilemma is essentially seeing if these 2 people are going to cooperate even under the the circumstances of what the investigators or the police are giving them. So that's what the prisoner's dilemma is, and it's discussed a lot in game theory. So we want to be able to apply this to pool cannibalization, pool wars, all of this. So in the prisoner's dilemma, there's something called the Nash Equilibrium, and it's essentially a game state in which no player can earn a higher reward by changing their strategies, assuming that all the other player strategies remain unchanged. So let's just go through this example. Let's say we started off at both pool 1 and pool 2 are idle. This means both of them are not attacking each other. So if we start here, pool 1 plus 3, pool 2 plus 3. Does pool 1 have a strategy that they could do that would increase their rewards if they assume that pool 2 is going to stay idle? Yes, because they can go from plus 3 to plus 4 here, assuming that pool 2 is idle. Now that we're here in this game state, is there a way that pool 2 can increase their rewards, assuming that pool 1 is staying in their strategy? So pool 1 is attacking, pool 1 has 4, pool 2 has 1. So pool 2 can move here. and they would be getting +2 instead of +1, which is also better for them. So now that we're here, is there a strategy that pool 1 can do? Assuming that pool 2 stays in the attacking category, that will increase their rewards? No, because if they move here, they would go to +1. And then same thing for pool 2. If they assume that pool 1 is attacking and they move over here, they would getting +1. And so +2 and +2 are their Nash equilibrium, because there's no better state that they could be in, assuming that the other person is staying in the strategy that they had strategized or they had done. So yeah, that's the Nash equilibrium in this case. I know that was a lot, so do you have any questions about pool cannibalization, pool hopping, expected value of blocks, or anything that I just discussed? Yes.
People work on the same block. The first one to win the money. The first one to find the block to win.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, oh, sorry.
So there is a lot of people who work on the block, but people other pool find before that, so they lose all their work.
Yeah, so every pool is consisting of miners. So if I'm a miner in one pool and I find a block in this pool, then my 6.25 Bitcoin are going to be distributed among everybody else in the same pool. So if another pool finds that before, then that pool is the one that gets that 6.25 Bitcoin reward, and they're going to be distributing that among their miners. Does that answer your question?
Okay, yes. The one who not paying the money, but who work.
I'm sorry? No, you're good.
Two pool work on the same block. If one pool finds the block before the other will not have the money.
Yeah, the other one would not get any money.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so like a miner can work every day without paying money because people will find the block before him.
Yeah, exactly. So there's still a possibility that one pool is never going to find the money, but that probability is a lot lower if that pool is large enough that they have enough miners in that pool. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Why would you join a pool that has less hash power? Like, what is the reason? If the probability is higher, if you go to a higher pool with higher power.
Yeah.
So why would people choose like a pool with lower hash rate?
Yeah. I think in the real world, the mining pools are more evenly distributed, but I think people might want to join those because maybe the one with the more hash rate, the pool manager takes a greater cut. So then that could be a reason why you might want to join a pool with less hash power, because you would be getting more money then. So it's all about game theory and deciding like which ones would be best for your case. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you explain again like how the Nash Equilibrium works in case of pool?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so this is basically saying that in the real world, there are multiple different options. So of course, pool 1 could stay idle, pool 2 could stay idle. They could both not attack each other, and then they would both be getting like better rewards if they're not attacking each other. But they have to like agree to cooperate in that sense. And then in game theory, like it's more likely that they'll both want to attack each other. But as you can see, this makes it lower than if they both don't attack each other. So it depends on the participants in the entire network and whether they're going to choose to cooperate or not.
So how do they choose to cooperate? What's the situation when they cooperate, and when is it possible that they're going to cooperate?
Yeah, definitely. So everything that we've discussed in these previous slides, as well as what we're going to be talking about the rest of the lecture, is all very theoretical. These are what people were talking about before Bitcoin was even created. Like this would be a possibility of what happens, but there's no way that you can just be like, oh, I'm not going to attack you and you're not going to attack me. But I think in the real world, pool cannibalization doesn't really happen that often either. So this is just like a theoretical concept that we don't really have solid examples for.
So like, is it more probable for it to be existing in the first than like in the Nash Equilibrium in the real world, or is it choose to cooperate instead of attacking each other?
I think it's more likely that we're staying in the idle for both pools right now, but I don't really know the exact answer for that, so I can get back to you. What's your name? Amin?
Amay.
Ahmad? I'm so sorry.
It's Amay.
A-M-A-Y. A may? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, I'll definitely get back to you on that question. Okay. Anything else? All right. Okay, so now we're gonna be talking about forking and double spends. So what are these things? Okay, so a fork is essentially a change in the network protocol. And so there's two types of forks here that we see. We see a hard fork and a soft fork. So what a hard fork is essentially the old blockchain on the very top is going to continue, but somebody proposes an upgrade. So then they start following the new rules on this chain. But then both of these chains are not accepting one another. So the old rule followers do not accept that the new rules are being implemented. So they continue building on both of these chains. So then the people who update their protocol, they're gonna build on the new chain, and the people who don't upgrade their protocol are going to continue building on the old chain. But then a soft fork is not as severe as this. So this is where blocks from the non-upgraded nodes, they're going to follow their old rules, but violate their new rules, but they're still going to accept that the new rules, the blocks mined on the new rules chain is valid. So then eventually this is just only going to be a chain on the new chain, because the blocks violating the new rules are going to be made stale. Like you see this block just stops, and then you're going to continue mining on this new chain with the updated protocols. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about this side? Okay, so now we're going to be talking about double spending. We talked a little bit about this in our very first lecture. So this is essentially successfully spending the same value of Bitcoin more than once. So let's just say hypothetically in the year of 2099, Alice wants to buy an iPhone 92 XCS from Bob on the black market for 100 Bitcoin, but she doesn't want to actually give up for her 100 Bitcoin. So what's one way that Alice can double spend on Bob? So she can do something called a race attack. So this is essentially, so Alice is going to tell Bob, hey, I've made this transaction to send you this 100 Bitcoin. I'm going to show you this transaction. Bob's going to be like, okay, I'm just going to trust that this transaction is valid, and before it's even put on a block, and I'm going to send you this iPhone. So then Bob ships Alice this new iPhone after seeing that Alice has given him a transaction with the 100 Bitcoin, but it's not even included in a block yet. And on the other side, Alice is like, okay, I'm also going to create another transaction where I'm spending the 100 Bitcoin to myself, because remember from like a couple lectures back, you can create a UTXO to yourself. So she would create another transaction where she sends that 100 Bitcoin to herself. And so she's essentially, these two transactions that she just created, she's going to race to add the one that she's sending to herself. She wants that transaction added to a block before the one that she has sent to Bob, before the transaction where she sent 100 Bitcoin to Bob. So how does she do this? She would put higher transaction fees on her transaction that she's sending to herself than the transaction that she's sending to Bob. And so other miners, they're going to see these two transactions, but the one with the higher transaction fee is the one they're going to actually include in their block or want to include in their block. And the other one is just not going to be put on a block. And so Alice would do that, and then Bob would only realize that the transaction that he thought was valid is not on a block after this is propagated through the rest of the network, and Alice's second malicious transaction is included on the block, while the transaction one, which Alice said they sent 100 Bitcoin to Bob, is not included on the blockchain. So what's one way to fix this? One way to fix this is with confirmations. So before Bob sends Alice the iPhone, he can say, okay, we're going to need X amount of confirmations before I send you the iPhone. So confirmations are the number of blocks created on top of a block the transaction is in. So if this is the block holding my transaction, it has two confirmations. It's because there's two blocks on top of it. This block in the middle has one confirmation because there's one block on top of it. And then this block right here is the most recent block, and it has 0 confirmations because no blocks are on top of it. And so if Bob's like, okay, the block with my transaction needs to have at least 5 confirmations before I send you the iPhone, then it becomes harder and harder for Alice to manipulate that, because she would actually need to find, or she would actually need to have 5 other blocks on top of that block with her transaction in order for Bob to send her the iPhone. So what if Alice controls more than 50% of the total network hash power? So whenever Alice's chain is behind the honest network's chain, she will always be able to catch up and outproduce the honest miners. And this is because she has 51 or more of the total network hash power. And so she would be able to add any transaction she wants to her blockchain. And the probability that Alice can successfully double spend with over 50% of hash power would reach 100%. So what are some incentives that we should talk about? So why would Alice not want to double spend in this scenario? So if the rest of the network detects the double spend, it's going to be assumed that confidence in the cryptocurrency and the network rate would plummet. So then people are like, okay, Alice double spent. So like now the whole entire Bitcoin network shouldn't be trusted. So now I'm not going to buy anything using Bitcoin. I'm not going to trust any of the transactions that are made on the Bitcoin network. So then the cryptocurrency would plummet. Another thing we should talk about is bribing miners. So Alice might not physically control all of the mining hardware necessary to have that 51% network hash rate power, so that she could double spend however much she wants. But she can bribe miners using whatever ways people bribe one another, or even entire pools, to only mine on her own chain. And Jake's gonna be talking a little bit about that in a second. But what if Alice is a hostile government, adversarial altcoin, large financial institution with significant capital available? Then Alice can also acquire enough mining ASICs or bribe miners or pools to achieve that 50% effective hash power. So like I said earlier, all of this whole entire lecture is very theoretical, and this is actually very, very difficult to do. So this has not really happened in the history of Bitcoin or blockchain quite yet, and I don't think it ever will. Are there any questions? Okay. Do you all need a break? Maybe like 3 minutes? Okay, let's give you a 4-minute break. So chat among yourselves. Why?
I did. I mean, I cut slides earlier just because I didn't think they were super relevant. But so like basically there was like defenses, but like I found the defenses were all like basically just like people come up with their own like what they think it would be a good defense. And that was kind of sus. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Also, like none of this shit actually happened in real life. Yeah. So like all of this is like.
well, especially if you're doing like Bitcoin or like a bigger.
What happened?
But I said especially with like a bigger cryptocurrency, like no, it wasn't fine. Just started. Okay, so we're gonna get started again. So now I'm gonna be talking about censorship. And yeah, so basically in earlier lectures, we kind of talked about how the blockchain network was censorship resistant. But there is still cases where you can be censored within the blockchain network, although it's very unlikely, but we do like to theorize about this type of stuff because it's interesting to learn about. So yeah. So just kind of like setting the stage, let's just say we have Alice and then we have Bob. And in this case, Alice is going to have 51% of the network's hash rate. And in the real world, this is like pretty unlikely because 51% of a network's hash rate, unless it's an incredibly small network, is pretty difficult to obtain. But just for this, like we're just going to say Alice has 51% of the hash rate. So this is just setting the stage. And yeah, so now we want to think about how we'd be able to like censor Bob. Like how can we make it so Bob has no access to spending his transactions? He can't spend his Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency he wants to spend. How do we censor him? So in the naive strategy, Alice would tell her pools basically to not include Bob's transaction. So essentially we blacklist Bob. And the reason that this doesn't actually work is because even though Alice may be successful in not including Bob into the transactions at first, eventually, because there's that 49% of other people who are also mining, eventually Alice's miners aren't going to win the hash puzzle or aren't going to solve the hash puzzle first. And then those miners will just include Bob's transaction within the pool. And because of this, it'll just take longer for Bob's transaction to go through. But eventually it will be included. So yeah, so like this strategy doesn't work. But I guess the next strategy would be punitive forking. And the way we do this, okay. So with punitive forking, essentially Alice tells her pools not to mine on top of any Bob's transactions chains and instead make a fork. And Tiffany talked about this earlier, but basically we're going to split this pool into like blocks that have Bob's transactions and then this new fork with Alice's transactions. And because Alice has 51% of the hash rate, this would actually work well. Let's get through. So yeah, basically over time, Alice's pools will create the longest chain. And basically those transactions that mine on top of Bob's transactions will essentially be shorter in length because we have that 51% of the hash rate. So we can create this longer chain and essentially invalidate this other chain because in the end, we know that blockchain, the longest chain wins. So Alice's chain is going to work. And essentially this will censor Bob's transactions. Are there any questions about that? Okay, and again, this is very like theorized. It's very tough to have 51% of the pool, which kind of leads me into my other one about, here's more about how this would work. So yeah, basically, this is kind of a short summary. But okay, so yeah, like I said, 51% is very hard to obtain of the pool. So like that brings up the question, is there any other strategies for forking that doesn't require 51% of the pool? And that kind of brings us into feather forking, which essentially entails that I'm going to look for K confirmations of like how many blocks. And so for example, if my K equals 1, if one block builds on Bob's pool, then I'm just going to give up and like call it quits. Otherwise, if I want to basically censor Bob's, I'm going to try and build 2 blocks. And so, for example, if I have 20% of the hash rate, in order to get 2 blocks in a row, that's going to be Q squared because it's like 20.2 times 0.2. And that's like going to be the chance that I'm able to build on this block. And then this would censor Bob's transactions. But like say in another scenario where there's like another block here, then I would just give up and I wouldn't be able to censor Bob's transactions. So that's kind of like another way of doing it. Are there any questions about that? That might have been a bit unclear. Okay, cool. Yeah, then again, there's another question. Okay, cool. So our next topic is selfish mining. And yeah, so basically, suppose you are a miner that has just found a block and you decide to keep your block a secret. So now you might be wondering, why would I keep my block a secret, when I could get this reward? And, like then people could build on the chain and, it would help make it everything work smoothly. But essentially by withholding the block, you give yourself a huge advantage as you're the only person looking for this specific hash puzzle. So while everyone's, searching for
this block, like trying to solve the hash code of this block, you've already found it here. And or instead searching for this new hash puzzle to solve for this block. So basically you have this huge advantage and you're basically able to do work while no one else is doing work. Does that anyone have questions about that? Yeah. What's the advantage of this? Yeah, so essentially like imagine this. So basically, you know, we have this like block that we think's not found, but I've actually found this block, right? So instead of having everybody in the world competing to solve for this next block, it's just me competing for this block because everybody thinks that we're still on this block, but we're actually on this block. So basically it's just like me competing for a while. But then I guess like that transitions into my next slide. The problem is that like, oh yeah, basically you continue minor and chain. Sorry. So yeah, basically the problem is that like, so like when you find the next block, you can eventually broadcast it and get like higher expected profits. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's like kind of the reason why we'd want to, you know, like keep our block secret. Oh yeah, any questions about that?
If there's a clear advantage of holding the block, why doesn't every miner try to do it?
Yeah, okay, sorry. Okay, I guess I skipped over those slides on accident. Okay, so wait, sorry, one of them are blocked. Okay. Okay, so the reason we don't want to block withhold, sorry, I totally skipped over the slide, my bad. Is basically, so, okay, imagine this, you know, imagine I'm looking for this like next block right here, right? And say like I haven't solved for this block, but I have this block, right? If the chain solves for this block and this person broadcasts it before me, I essentially lose all my rewards, right? So I don't gain the rewards for this block because this person solved it and they're like, oh, well, this person found the block before you, this person's more valid. So that's the reason why like this is an effective method, because in the real world, especially because, you know, it's a lot more difficult than just like, it's like really hard to find a block, right? It takes a long time depending on your hashing power. So it's pretty unlikely that you're going to find the second block. So realistically, the more risky nature is that somebody finds this block or like the block you're hiding before you find the second block, which is like the reason why I wouldn't want to do this. But it is like a strategy that you could use. Are there any other questions? Cool. Okay, I think that's, yeah. Yeah, so then there's a tennis code if there's no more questions.